For the interface VLAN 1, for example, for the telnet and SSH, we can take the IP address from the DHCP server with the IP address DHCP. In most cases, we don't use this function. Why? Because you need to assign one specific IP address to remembering this IP address to connecting to this device. But if you want, you can use this feature. As you can see now, the IP address of 192.168.126 is assigned to the switch in the show. Again, show IP interface brief can show us that we have IP address for the interface VLAN 1. Very good. Until now, we have learned about the two roles that one router or one MLS can, for example, take in in the DHCP process, DHCP relay agent, and also DHCP client. But one of the useful and interesting features about the router is that the router can act as a DHCP server also. It's so important, so interesting, and in some cases so useful. You can configure the DHCP protocol on the router for giving the IP address, for assigning the IP address to the other system. Let me talk about how we can configure the router as the DHCP server. Okay, let me talk about the configuration of the DHCP server on one router, but it's important to say that this is beyond the scope of the CCNA, and this is not one of the topics of the CCNA. In CCNA only, we should learn about the configuration of the router as a DHCP client and also DHCP relay agent, not DHCP server. It is only for your information. Okay, how we can configure one router as the DHCP server? It is so easy. Look at here. In the router, the first thing that you should, for example, note to that is the enabling the service of the DHCP. The service of DHCP by default is enabled, and you don't need to enable it, but it's important to ensure that this service is enabled before. After that, you need to configure the DHCP pool. If you want, you can exclude some of the IP addresses from the, for example, DHCP pool in the router with this command IP DHCP excluded address. Okay, start IP and to the end IP. Assume that we don't want to assign from the 192.168.1.1 to 192.168.1.10. You can use this command for excluding these addresses from assignment to the systems. After that, now you can configure the DHCP pool, IP DHCP pool, and then pool name. It is so easy, okay? And then you will enter to the router config DHCP config. So easy. Okay, how we can configure the DHCP pool? For example, you can configure the network and then net ID, and then for example, net mask 192.168.10.255.255.255.0. Okay, after that, we can configure the other information, router DHCP config. The next information can be default router. Default router means default gateway. Here you can give more than one IP, IP1, IP2, but let me to use only one IP. After that, again, we can configure the IP address of, for example, the DNS server, router DHCP config. Again, the DNS server IP address is, for example, DNS IP, one IP address, or maybe two. You can use two IP addresses here. And after that, you can configure another IP addresses here. For example, NetBIOS name server, domain name server, for example, and also some other things. And finally, you can configure the lease time. The lease time by default in Cisco is 1 day. You can tune it with the, for example, day, hour, second, if you want. Okay, day, hour, minute. Okay, if you want, you can configure with this command, and also with the show IP DHCP binding, we can verify the status of their assigned IP address in the DHCP server. Let me to configure this scenario. It is so easy. In the R1 conft, the first command is assigning the IP address to the interface of R1. This is the interface fast Ethernet 00. Okay, IP address then 192.168.11255.255.255.0. You know that this is the default gateway of the C1, C2, and C3 and C4. Okay, that's it, no shutdown. Now let me to configure the DHCP. The service of DHCP is enabled by default, but let me to use service DHCP. IP DHCP excluded address from 192.168.1.1 to the 192.168, for example 110. This means that please don't assign from this range IP address to the systems. And after that, IP DHCP pool name is not important, for example pool 1. Okay, and after that, here we can configure the network 192.168.1.0.255.255.255.0. If you want, you can configure network 192.168.1.0. After that, for example, /24. Both of them can be used, but let me to use 255.255.255.0. And then the default router 192.168.1.1. The DHCP automatically doesn't assign this IP address to the systems. And then DNS server 192.168, for example 1.2. Also other addresses can be assigned here to the systems. For example, if you want, you can configure NetBIOS name server. If you want, you can configure the domain name and some other things. About the lease time, let me to configure lease time 2 days. And or for example 2 hours and 2 minutes. So easy. Okay, that's it. This is the configuration that we need for the DHCP. Show IP DHCP or binding can show us that until now we didn't assign any IP address to the systems. Let me to take IP address in the C1, C2, and C3 and C4. If you want, also you can capture this link for verifying the function to sniffing the packets. Okay, here in the C1, now we should send DHCP discovery to take IP address only. Please show me the DHCP packets. And this is the C1. Okay, look at here. This is the C1. This is computer 1. IP DHCP. Okay, IP DHCP. This is the discovery. Look at it. D means discovery, O means offer, R means request, and A means acknowledge. DHCP discovery, DHCP offer, DHCP request, DHCP acknowledgement. So easy, as you can see here. And finally, now we will have IP address. The 192.168.1.11/24 is the IP address of the system, and the gateway is the 192.168.1.1. For example, in the router, now in the show IP DHCP binding, you can see the IP address assigned to this MAC address, and also the type of this IP address assignment is automatic. I will talk about the type of IP address assignment. After that, for example, about the next PC, PC2, again IP DHCP. The 192.168.1.12 should be assigned. Okay. After some second, DORA process. As you can see, yes, 192.168.1.12, PC3, 192.168.1.13. Okay, /24. After some second. Very good. Okay, yes. Now the PC4, again the same process. Because of that, now in the DHCP server, in the show IP DHCP binding, you can find 4 IP address that we have in the systems. Let me to talk about the type of IP address assignment. Here you can see the type of automatic. We have 3 type of the IP address assignment in the DHCP. The first type is the dynamic. Let me to write here the allocation modes of the DHCP. Allocation modes. The first is dynamic, and the second is automatic. Okay, and the third is the for example static. Okay, we have these 3 type of IP address assignment in the DHCP. Okay, actually now you can see the dynamic method. Dynamic method, we are giving the IP address to the systems, to the PCs, and also the PC can receive its IP address. After some time it should renew its IP address, because only for the least time we are taking this IP address to the systems. But in automatic method, we are giving the IP address to the systems without any limitation about the time. Actually, the least time is unlimited or infinite. Let me to show you here in the DHCP. If you configure the DHCP IP DHCP pool, okay, IP DHCP pool, and then for example pool 1, Okay, assume that here we are configuring the lease with infinite. Lease infinite means this IP address now is assigning the, for example, to one system, and this is forever. The system doesn't need to renew its IP address. And also about the static, we can reserve one IP address to one system. This is beyond the scope of CCNA. But maybe in some cases, in some implementation of the DHCP, you see the dynamic and automatic, or with, for example, same concept, but actually dynamic means we have lease time, okay, and this is the limited lease